We start with breaking news of Russia's president ordering a temporary ceasefire to the war in Ukraine for Orthodox Christmas. The Kremlin announcing the ceasefire last hour. It follows an appeal for a 36-hour truce by Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Orthodox Church in Moscow, to allow Orthodox Christians to attend services Friday and Saturday. It is notable that Kirill has been a vocal supporter of Russia's war and is feuding over that stance with Pope Francis, who calls it Russian expansionism and imperialism. Scott McLean is back with us this hour from Kyiv, and we've also got international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson in London for us. Scott, I want to start with you. Patriarch Kirill spoke about this ceasefire earlier for Orthodox Christmas. Putin, the Kremlin, now agreeing to it. We still haven't heard from the Ukrainians.
Actually, Lenny, I'm literally reading this for the first time. It's literally come in a Ukrainian response to this appeal to have a ceasefire. The Kremlin agreeing to what Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow, had called for, which is a ceasefire beginning noon tomorrow, Christmas Eve, in the Orthodox faith, through the rest of Christmas Day as well. The Russians put out a statement essentially saying, look, the ball's in your court, Ukraine, and we're just getting the first response here. This is from an advisor to President Zelensky. His name is Mihailo Podolak. He is commonly outspoken on many issues, and he said the Russian Orthodox Church is not an authority for global orthodoxy and acts as a war propagandist. The Russian Orthodox Church called for the genocide of Ukrainians, incited mass murder, and insists on even greater militarization of the Russian Federation. So not exactly a direct response, not exactly a confirmation that the Ukrainians plan to go along with this, but clearly a lot of cynicism coming from the Ukrainian side on this. You can imagine how Ukrainian troops are feeling out there on the front lines, having been told things that the Russians were going to do in the past, and then the Russians not keeping their word. The Russians, even before this war began, said they had no plans to invade Ukraine, and look where we are right now. And so I think the Ukrainians are probably feeling pretty cynical about this offer, and that it's not a genuine offer, or that it won't be a genuine ceasefire. So it's hard to imagine that the Ukrainians won't be on guard, even if they're not necessarily launching missiles across the other side of the front line. But again, we're waiting to hear something a little bit more direct, a little bit more firm. Eleni?
Yeah, we're waiting for more lines to come in. I want to bring in Nick Robertson, and clearly, as Scott was explaining, there's mistrust because we've seen things fall apart in the past. What are you making of what the Russian Orthodox Church is saying, Kremlin agreeing to the ceasefire and the lines out of Ukraine?
Well, President Putin is the one that pulls all the strings in Russia, so there should be no misapprehension that what the Patriarch is saying is what President Putin wants him to say. It's Putin who is under pressure at home, but this is an unpopular war, so anything that he can do to make it look like he really cares about the lives of his troops who are being sacrificed in huge numbers on his orders is something that is going to perhaps slightly alleviate some of the pressure on him back home. So this looks good for President Putin. But let's not forget as well, Putin has huge form on calling for ceasefires, freezing conflicts in places. He did this most notably in Syria. And then he will just fire up the conflict again when he wants, when the moment is right for him. Now, this is being talked about as only a limited 36-hour ceasefire. But Ukrainians are right to be skeptical because there is zero trust of the Russian position, and President Putin's actions have taken care and made that relationship as damaged as it is. And what the Ukrainians are saying, in essence, is if you want a lasting peace, if you want a truce, then pull your troops out. Ukraine is defending its territories. This was an illegal, unprovoked invasion by Russian forces. And that is still the position, and that's Ukraine's negotiating position. That's part of President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. And we heard only today from President Putin saying that the only peace plan that he's considering, this was in his conversation with President Erdogan of Turkey, was one that where Ukraine cedes all the territory that the rest of the world is telling President Putin to pull out of. This is a move by President Putin. It seems to improve his own standing at home and certainly does not look like it's going to bring a longer peace solution in the short term.
We do have some lines from a Ukrainian official, Scott, that Russia must leave occupied territories in Ukraine before any temporary truce. I want you to take me through that, because as we've just ascertained, the Russians saying that Putin has agreed to the ceasefire between the Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 6th to 7th of Jan. This is going to be fundamental. As you say, we need something more concrete from the Ukrainians, but this is also very telling that they want Russia to leave what they call the occupied territories.
Yeah, that's right. So that statement that you just read from Mihailo Podolak saying that Russia must leave the occupied territories before any kind of temporary truce. First, Ukraine doesn't attack foreign territory and doesn't kill civilians, as Russian Federation does. Ukraine destroys only members of the occupation army on its territory. Second, Russian Federation must leave the occupied territories. Only then will it have a temporary truce. Keep hypocrisy to yourself. So Mihailo Podolak, I should point out, has been involved in the early peace talks in the early days of the war between the Russians and the Ukrainians, the ones that were held just inside the Belarusian border. And so this is a very high-ranking official. He also commonly comments on some of the explosions inside of Russia, the ones that Ukraine has not taken official responsibility for. And so we'll see what President Zelensky says, but it seems like this is the most official thing that we've heard, and that seems that the Ukrainians have no interest in going along with this ceasefire because they simply do not trust the Russians. I should also point out that Ukraine is also trying to, or since its independence, has really tried to distance itself from the Russian Orthodox Church. And even there have been plenty of questions about Patriarch Kirill since this war began, since he's been openly supportive of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Even in a recent sermon, he said that military service will wash away all sins. So gives you a little bit of a picture about the type of leader we're talking about.
Yeah, it does indeed. Scott McLean, Nick Robertson, thank you very much for that update.